The bridge of the battleship Thunder's Edge hummed with quiet activity as Admiral Kane stood before the massive viewing screen. Outside, the stars looked peaceful, but the scars on his ship told a different story. Dark burn marks covered the hull where enemy weapons had nearly broken through. 3 months of fighting, the Void Hunters had left the entire Crimson Tide. Fleet battered, but victorious. Kane was a tall man with gray hair and eyes that had seen too much war. His uniform bore the marks of countless battles, and his crew respected him more than they feared him. That was saying something, because Kane's fleet was known throughout human space as the most dangerous military force ever assembled. When other fleets failed, when colonies screamed for help against impossible odds, Earth Command sent the Crimson Tide Fleet. The fleet consisted of 12 massive warships, each one capable of reducing a planet to ash. The Thunder's Edge served as the flagship, carrying the most advanced weapons and shields human technology could produce. Around it, the other ships maintained perfect formation as they traveled through the void. The crews were exhausted but proud. They had just finished destroying the largest Void Hunter base in known space. Captain Torres approached Kane with a datapad in his hand. Torres was younger than the Admiral, with dark hair and a serious expression that never seemed to change. He had served under Kane for 5 years, and had never seen his commander make a mistake in battle. "Admiral, we're 2 days from the jump point to Earth," Torres reported. "The crew is looking forward to some leave time." Kane nodded but kept staring at the stars. Something felt wrong, though he could not explain what. In 30 years of military service, he had learned to trust his instincts. They had kept him alive when logic would have gotten him killed. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission," called out Riley from the communication station. She was a young officer with red hair and quick fingers that could work any communication system ever built. "It's not coming from any human vessel." Kane turned toward her station. "Put it on the main screen." The viewing screen flickered and changed. Instead of stars, strange symbols appeared across the display. The symbols pulsed and changed in patterns that hurt to look at. But underneath the alien writing, mathematical formulas appeared that any human could understand. Distance markers, coordinates, and most importantly, the universal distress signal that had been agreed upon by all spacefaring races. "How long has this been transmitting?" Kane asked. Riley checked her instruments. "The signal has been repeating." "For approximately 6 hours, sir. But there's something strange about it. The transmission contains detailed information about our fleet movements from the past month." Torres stepped closer to the screen. "That's impossible. No alien race has access to our tactical data." Kane studied the alien symbols as they continued to pulse and change. He had seen many alien languages during his career, but this was different. These symbols seemed to contain layers of meaning, as if each one represented entire concepts rather than simple words. "Riley, can you decode any of this?" "I'm trying, sir, but it's unlike anything in our databases. However, the mathematical portions are clear. They're asking for help, and they're providing coordinates to a system beyond the frontier zones." Kane walked to his command chair and sat down. The frontier zones were dangerous areas where human colonies barely survived against hostile alien races. Beyond them lay unexplored space where anything could be waiting. Taking the fleet into unknown territory would be a violation of their orders to return to Earth. "Sir," Torres said quietly, "this could be a trap. The Void Hunters are known for their tricks." Kane considered this. The Void Hunters were mechanical beings that had been humanity's enemy for over a decade. They were clever and ruthless, capable of elaborate deceptions. But something about this transmission felt different. The desperation and the repeating signal seemed genuine. "Engineer Beck, report to the bridge." Kane ordered through the ship's communication system. Beck arrived within minutes, her tool belt jangling as she walked. She was a small woman with grease-stained hands and an ability to understand any piece of technology she encountered. Beck could make broken machines work and working machines perform miracles. What do you make of this signal? Kane asked, gesturing toward the screen. Beck studied the display for several minutes, her eyes moving rapidly as she analyzed the patterns. Sir, this is definitely not Void Hunter technology. The signal structure is too complex, too elegant. Whoever sent this has a much more advanced understanding of mathematics than we do. Could they be hostile? Possible, but unlikely. The energy signature suggests they put enormous effort into making this transmission as clear as possible. If they wanted to harm us, there would be easier ways. Kane stood and began pacing behind his chair. His crew watched him carefully, knowing that whatever decision he made would affect all their lives. The Admiral was famous for making quick decisions in battle, but this was different. This choice could change the fate of the human race. Riley, how long would it take us to reach those coordinates? At maximum speed, approximately 4 days, sir. But we would be violating our orders to return to Earth immediately. Torres stepped forward. Admiral, Earth Command is expecting us. We've been away for 3 months. Our families. Kane held up his hand for silence. He understood his crew's desire to go home. They had fought hard and earned their rest. But something about the alien signal called to him. In all his years of service, he had never encountered a race that asked for help rather than demanding surrender or threatening destruction. Beck, is there any way to respond to this signal? I can try, sir, but without understanding their language. Communication would be limited to basic mathematical concepts. Kane nodded. Do it. Send a response indicating that we have received their message and are considering their request. Beck worked at the communication station for several minutes, her fingers dancing across the controls. Finally, she looked up. Message sent, sir. The response came almost immediately. The alien symbols on the screen changed, becoming more urgent and desperate. New mathematical formulas appeared, showing star charts and what appeared to be battle formations. But most disturbing were the images that began to accompany the symbols. The screen showed massive structures floating in space, beautiful and delicate like crystal flowers. But the images also showed these structures being destroyed by dark shapes that seemed to consume everything they touched. The destruction was systematic and complete, leaving nothing behind but empty space. My God, whispered Torres. They're showing us their people being slaughtered. Kane stared at the images as they continued to cycle through scenes of destruction. Whatever was attacking these aliens was unlike anything humanity had ever encountered. The dark shapes moved with purpose and intelligence, but they seemed to consume rather than conquer. Sir, Riley said softly, there's more. They're sending tactical data about their attackers. Range, speed, weapons capabilities. They're giving us everything they know about their enemy. Kane realized what was happening. These aliens, whoever they were, had been watching humanity's battles against the Void Hunters. They had studied human tactics and decided that only humanity's military might could save them from whatever was destroying their civilization. The Admiral looked around his bridge at the faces of his crew. These men and women had followed him through countless battles against impossible odds. They trusted his judgment completely. But this decision would take them further from home than any human had ever traveled, into unknown space to fight an enemy they knew nothing about. Kane made his choice. Set course for those coordinates. Maximum speed. Torres looked shocked. Sir, our orders will be explained when we return, Kane finished. Riley, send a message to Earth Command informing them of our new mission. Tell them we're responding to a distress call from a previously unknown alien race. As the Thunder's Edge changed course and the rest of the fleet followed, Kane continued to watch the alien transmission. The images of destruction continued to play, but now they were accompanied by new symbols that seemed to express hope. These unknown aliens believed that humanity could save them. Kane only hoped they were right. 4 days later, The Crimson Tide fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the coordinates from the alien transmission. What Admiral Kane saw on the viewing screen took his breath away. The system contained no planets, but it was far from empty. Massive, crystalline structures floated in the void between three dying stars, each one the size of a city and glowing with soft inner light. The structures were beautiful beyond anything Kane had ever seen. They looked like living crystals that had grown naturally in space, with delicate spires and flowing curves that seemed to pulse with their own heartbeat. Each structure was unique, yet they all shared the same elegant design that spoke of an ancient and sophisticated civilization. "Sir," Riley reported from her station, "I'm detecting thousands of life signs within those structures. The energy readings are unlike anything in our databases." Kane studied the alien city ships through the Thunder's Edge's powerful sensors. "Any sign of the attackers mentioned in their transmission?" "Not yet, sir. But there are debris fields scattered throughout the system. The remains appear to be from structures similar to the ones still intact." Torres joined Kane at the command station. "Admiral, we're receiving another transmission. This one is different from the distress signal." The main screen flickered, changed. Instead of mathematical symbols, an image appeared that made several crew members gasp. The being on the screen looked ancient and wise, with skin that seemed to be made of living crystal and eyes that held the depth of centuries. It stood nearly 8 feet tall, with long limbs that moved with fluid grace. When the being spoke, its voice was somehow translated into perfect English. "Greetings, warriors of humanity. I am Leto, speaker for the Keepers of Knowledge. We have watched your battles across the stars and know of your reputation. You have come far to answer our call for help." Kane stepped forward. "This is Admiral Kane of the human fleet. We received your distress signal and came to offer assistance. What threatens your people?" Leto's crystalline features showed what could only be described as relief. "We are grateful beyond words. For countless generations, my people have collected and preserved the knowledge of every civilization we have encountered. Our floating cities contain the wisdom of 1,000 different races, their histories, their sciences, their art and culture." The screen changed to show the interior of one of the crystal structures. Kane saw vast halls filled with glowing data crystals, each one containing the memories and knowledge of entire civilizations. Beings similar to Leto moved through the halls, tending to the crystal libraries with reverent care. "But now we face extinction," Leto continued. "An enemy has come that we cannot fight, cannot reason with, cannot escape. They are called the Devourers, and they consume not just our bodies, but our knowledge itself. When they finish with a civilization, nothing remains, not even the memory that it ever existed." Kane felt a chill run down his spine. "Show me these Devourers." The screen shifted again, and Kane saw something that made his experienced warrior's heart race with fear. The creatures were unlike anything in human knowledge. They looked like living shadows with substance, constantly shifting between forms. Sometimes they appeared as massive ships, sometimes as swarms of smaller beings, sometimes as pure energy that flowed like liquid darkness. "They came from beyond the galactic rim 6 months ago," Leto explained. "We tried to communicate with them to understand their purpose. But they do not communicate. They only consume. They have already destroyed 17 of our cities, taking with them the accumulated knowledge of civilizations that existed before your son was born." Torres leaned closer to Kane. "Sir, if what he's saying is true, those creatures are destroying the history of the entire galaxy." Kane studied the images of destruction on the screen. The Devourers moved with terrible efficiency, surrounding the crystal cities and somehow draining them of their inner light. When they finished, the beautiful structures became dark and lifeless, drifting like tombstones in the void. "Why did you contact us specifically?" Kane asked. "Surely there are other races with more advanced technology than humanity." Leto's expression grew even more serious. "We have contacted many races, Admiral Kane. All have failed. The Devourers adapt to every weapon, every strategy, every form of attack. They learn from each encounter and become stronger. But in studying the records of your battles, we have discovered something unique about humanity." "What's that?" "Other races fight with logic, with predictable patterns based on their nature and culture. But humans fight with something more. You combine logic with instinct, order with chaos. Your tactics are impossible to predict, because even you do not know what you will do until the moment of action. This unpredictability is what makes you dangerous to enemies who depend on learning and adaptation." Kane felt a mixture of pride and concern. "You've been studying our military records? How?" "We are keepers of knowledge, Admiral. We observe and record everything that happens in the galaxy. We know of your wars, your victories, your defeats. We know of your species' capacity for both great cruelty and great compassion. We know that you are the only race that has consistently defeated enemies who seemed impossible to beat." The screen showed images that made Kane uncomfortable. Battle scenes from human history, including some of humanity's darker moments. Wars between human nations, the destruction of entire cities, the suffering that humans had inflicted on each other and on other species. "We also know of your capacity for violence," Leto continued. "Some among my people feared contacting you, worried that you might prove as dangerous as the Devourers themselves. But I convinced them that your violence serves a purpose. You fight, not just to destroy, but to protect what you value." Kane was about to respond when alarms began sounding throughout the bridge. Rayleigh's voice cut through the noise. "Sir, detecting massive energy signatures approaching from the edge of the system. Multiple contacts, moving at incredible speed." The main screen switched to show the incoming threat. Kane saw a sight that made his blood run cold. Dozens of dark shapes were emerging from hyperspace, each one larger than his biggest battleship. They moved with fluid grace, like living things rather than machines. "The Devourers," Leto said, his voice filled with ancient fear. "They have found us again." Kane immediately switched to his command frequency. "All ships, battle stations. Prepare for incoming hostiles. Unknown capabilities, assume maximum threat level." Throughout the fleet, crews rushed to their positions. Weapons charged, shields activated, and the proud ships of the Crimson Tide fleet prepared for battle. But Kane knew they were facing something completely outside their experience. "Leto, what can you tell us about their weapons and defenses?" Kane demanded. "They do not use weapons as you understand them, Admiral. They consume energy directed at them and use it to grow stronger. The more you attack them, the more powerful they become. We have seen entire fleets destroyed not by the Devourers' weapons, but by their own energy being turned against them." Torres grabbed Kane's arm. "Sir, if conventional weapons don't work, how are we supposed to fight them?" Kane stared at the approaching enemy ships. They were close enough now that he could see their true nature. They weren't ships at all, but living creatures of enormous size. Their dark surfaces rippled and flowed like liquid, and Kane could swear he saw what looked like eyes opening and closing across their hulls. "We do what humans have always done," Kane said grimly. "We improvise." The first Devourer ship entered weapons range, and Kane gave the order to attack. The Thunder's Edge unleashed a full barrage of energy weapons, followed by the rest of the fleet. The space between the two forces lit up with brilliant explosions and crackling energy, but as the light faded, Kane saw with growing horror that the Devourer ship was not damaged. Instead, it seemed larger and more solid than before. It had absorbed their attack and used the energy to grow stronger. "Sir, the creature is moving toward the nearest Keeper City," Riley reported. "It's ignoring us completely." Kane watched as the Devourer ship approached one of the crystal structures. Tendrils of darkness extended from its hull, wrapping around the beautiful crystalline spires. The moment they made contact, the city's inner light began to fade. "They're not just destroying it," Torres said in horror. "They're eating it." Kane realized that Leto had been right. These creatures were beyond anything humanity had ever faced. But as he watched the ancient knowledge of entire civilizations being consumed, he felt something rise within him that was purely human. It was the same feeling that had driven his species to fight impossible odds throughout their history. It was the refusal to give up, no matter how hopeless things seemed. "All ships, new tactics," Kane ordered. "We're not trying to destroy them. We're trying to save those cities. Focus on disruption and distraction. Make them pay attention to us, instead of the Keepers." The fleet spread out in a complex pattern, using their speed and maneuverability to harass the Devourer ships. It was a desperate strategy, but it was working. The creatures were turning away from the Keeper cities to focus on the human fleet. Kane knew they had only bought time. The real battle was yet to come. The battle lasted 3 hours and ended in disaster. Admiral Kane watched helplessly as the Devourer creatures adapted to every tactic his fleet used. When the human ships fired energy weapons, the creatures absorbed them. When they tried ramming attacks, the creatures simply flowed around the ships like living liquid. When they used missiles, the creatures caught them and somehow turned the explosives into part of their own mass. By the end of the fight, Kane had lost 3 destroyers and nearly lost his flagship. The Thunder's Edge limped away from the battle, with hull breaches on 4 decks and half its crew injured. The other ships were in similar condition, their proud hulls scarred and smoking. But the worst part was that the Devourers had barely seemed to notice the human attack. They continued consuming the Keeper cities while fighting, treating the human fleet like an annoying distraction. Kane watched 2 more crystal structures go dark, their ancient knowledge lost forever. "Damage report," Kane ordered as the fleet regrouped near the edge of the system. Captain Torres looked grim as he read from his datapad. 700 casualties across the fleet, 17 dead. Multiple hull breaches, weapon systems damaged, and we're running low on energy reserves. Kane slumped in his command chair. In 30 years of military service, he had never faced an enemy that could not be defeated through superior tactics and firepower. But the Devourers were something else entirely. They were not just immune to human weapons, they were made stronger by them. "Sir, we're receiving another transmission from the Keepers," Riley reported. Leto appeared on the main screen, but he looked different now. His crystalline features seemed dimmer, and there was a weariness in his ancient eyes that spoke of countless losses. "Admiral Kane, I apologize for the deception," Leto said. "I did not tell you the full truth about the Devourers because I feared. You would not come if you knew how hopeless our situation truly is." Kane stood up, anger flashing in his eyes. "What didn't you tell us?" "The Devourers are not just consuming our knowledge randomly. They are building towards something called the Convergence. Every piece of information they consume becomes part of a growing intelligence that spans multiple dimensions. When they have consumed enough knowledge, they will become a single, all-knowing entity that can control the thoughts and actions of every living being in the galaxy." Torres stepped forward. "Are you saying they're trying to take over everyone's minds?" "Worse than that," Leto replied. "They are trying to erase the concept of individual thought entirely. In their vision, every sentient being will become part of their collective consciousness. Free will itself will cease to exist." Kane felt a chill run through him. "How long do we have?" "Based on their current rate of consumption, perhaps 2 days before they reach the critical mass needed for the convergence. Once that happens, resistance will be impossible." The bridge fell silent as the crew absorbed this information. Kane looked around at his officers, seeing his own despair reflected in their faces. They had come to help an alien race, and instead, found themselves facing the end of free will throughout the galaxy. There is one possibility, Leto continued. But it requires a sacrifice that I cannot ask of you. Tell me. Our archives contain the collected military knowledge of over 1,000 civilizations. Battle tactics, weapon designs, strategic thinking from species that existed before your galaxy was formed. This knowledge could give you the understanding needed to defeat the Devourers. Kane frowned. Then why haven't you used it yourself? Because accessing that knowledge comes with a price. The mind that receives it will be forever changed. The personality, the memories, the very essence of who you are will be altered by the experiences of countless other beings. You will gain the wisdom of ages, but you may lose yourself in the process. Kane studied Leto's face, seeing something there that the alien was not saying. There's more, isn't there? Yes, the process is irreversible. Once you accept the knowledge transfer, you can never return to being purely human. You will become something new, something that exists between human and alien consciousness. The bridge crew exchanged worried glances. Captain Torres spoke up. Sir, there has to be another way. We can't ask you to sacrifice your humanity for this. But Kane was already considering it. He had spent his entire life protecting humanity and human values. If becoming something more than human was the price of saving free will throughout the galaxy, it was a price he was willing to pay. How would the transfer work? Kane asked. You would need to come aboard one of our cities. We would connect your mind directly to our archives. The process takes several hours and is extremely painful. Many beings have died attempting it. Kane made his decision. I'll do it. Admiral, no, Torres protested. We can find another way. Kane turned to his longtime friend and subordinate. Captain, in 30 years of service, have you ever seen me back down from a fight? No, sir, but this is different. This could destroy who you are. And if I don't do it, the Devourers will destroy who everyone is. Kane looked around the bridge at his crew. I've spent my life making hard choices. This is just another one. 2 hours later, Kane found himself aboard one of the keeper cities. The interior was even more beautiful than he had imagined. Vast halls stretched in all directions, filled with crystalline formations that pulsed with stored knowledge. The very air seemed to hum with ancient wisdom. Leto led him to a chamber at the heart of the city. In the center of the room stood a complex device that looked like a crystal tree with branches extending in all directions. Each branch held a glowing node that contained the memories of entire civilizations. This is the archive core, Leto explained. It contains the military knowledge of every spacefaring race we have encountered. But I must warn you again, this knowledge comes from species that conquered galaxies, that committed acts of war that would horrify even your violent species. Kane approached the device. Will I still be human when this is over? You will be something more than human, but whether you will still be you, I cannot say. Kane reached out and touched the central crystal. Immediately, pain shot through his mind as alien memories began flooding his consciousness. He saw battles fought with weapons that could destroy stars, strategies that required the sacrifice of entire worlds, and military tactics so ruthless that they made human warfare look like a gentle game, but with the pain came understanding. He began to see patterns in the Devourers' behavior, weaknesses in their seemingly perfect adaptation, and most importantly, the key to their defeat. The process continued for hours. Kane's consciousness expanded as he absorbed the experiences of countless military commanders from across the galaxy. He learned about weapons that existed outside normal spacetime, about strategies that used the laws of physics themselves as tools of war, and about the true nature of the Devourers. When the transfer was complete, Kane opened his eyes and saw the universe with new understanding. He was still human, but he was also something more. The knowledge of 1,000 civilizations lived within His mind, and with it came the solution to their impossible problem. "I know how to defeat them," Kane said, his voice carrying a new authority that came from ages of accumulated wisdom. "But it will require us to do something that goes against everything both humans and keepers believe in." Leto studied Kane's face, seeing the change that had occurred. "What must we do?" "We have to destroy the very thing we're trying to protect," Kane replied. "The Devourers aren't just consuming your knowledge, they're trying to perfect it. They believe that by combining all knowledge into a single consciousness, they can create a universe without conflict or suffering. They're wrong, but they won't stop until they prove it." Kane turned toward the chamber's exit, his mind already working on the battle plan that would save the galaxy. But as he walked, he wondered if the man who had entered this chamber still existed, or if Admiral Kane had become something entirely new. The final battle was about to begin, and humanity's greatest weapon would not be their ships or their weapons, but their willingness to sacrifice everything for the principle of freedom. Admiral Kane returned to the Thunder's Edge a changed man. His crew noticed it immediately. He moved differently, spoke differently, and there was something in his eyes that seemed to hold the weight of centuries. When he looked at the tactical displays, he saw patterns and possibilities that had been invisible before. "Admiral," Captain Torres said carefully, "are you still you?" Kane paused before answering. The question was more complex than Torres could understand. Kane still remembered his childhood on Earth, still felt loyalty to his crew, still cared about protecting humanity. But now those human feelings existed alongside the memories of alien commanders who had fought wars across galaxies. "I'm still Kane," he said finally, "but I'm also more than Kane now. And that's what we need to win this war." Kane called his senior officers to the briefing room. When they assembled, they found their admiral standing before a holographic display that showed the entire star system. But the display was unlike anything they had seen before, showing energy patterns and dimensional layers that human sensors could not normally detect. "The Devourers aren't what we thought they were," Kane began. "They're not evil, at least not in the way we understand evil. They're trying to save the universe from itself." Commander Ellis, the fleet's intelligence officer, frowned. "Sir, they're destroying entire civilizations because they believe knowledge itself is corrupt," Kane explained. "Long ago, they were a peaceful race called the Harvesters. They collected and studied information just like the Keepers do, but they discovered something that drove them mad." Kane touched the holographic controls, and images appeared showing ancient civilizations. But these were not the peaceful wise races the crew expected to see. Instead, they saw species that had used their knowledge to commit terrible acts. Weapons that could torture entire planets, technologies that enslaved minds, and worst of all, knowledge that was deliberately designed to corrupt anyone who learned it. "The Harvesters found archives containing the most evil knowledge imaginable," Kane continued. "Instructions for creating suffering, methods for destroying hope itself, and information that turned beings into monsters simply by learning it. They tried to contain this knowledge, but it was too late. It had already begun to spread across the galaxy." Major Cross, the fleet's tactical officer, leaned forward. "So they decided to destroy all knowledge to stop the corruption." "Exactly. But in doing so, they became corrupted themselves. They convinced themselves that the only way to save the universe was to absorb all knowledge into a single, controlled consciousness. That's what they call the convergence." Kane changed the display to show the current battle situation. The Devourers had consumed 3 more Keeper cities during the night, and their ships were growing larger and more complex. Time was running out. "Here's what we're going to do," Kane said. "We're going to split the fleet into 3 groups. Each group will use completely different tactics based on alien military traditions that the Devourers have never encountered." Kane assigned commander. Ellis to lead a stealth operation using technology borrowed from a race called the Phase Walkers. Her ships would become partially invisible by shifting into another dimension, allowing them to attack the Devourers from angles they couldn't predict. Major Cross would command a direct assault force using the brutal shock tactics of a warrior. Race called the Iron Fangs. These aliens had believed that the only way to win a war was to be more violent and unpredictable than the enemy. Kane himself would lead the third group using strategies from an ancient race called the Mind Weavers, who had fought their wars as much with psychology as with weapons. "Sir," Torres said, "this plan requires us to attack our own allies' cities. The Keepers won't understand." Kane's expression grew sad. The Keepers are part of the problem, even though they don't realize it. Their archives contain the same corrupted knowledge that drove the Harvesters mad. As long as those archives exist, the Devourers will never stop trying to absorb them. The officers stared at their admiral in shock. Commander Ellis spoke first. "Are you saying we have to destroy the Keeper cities ourselves?" "I'm saying we have to make a choice between preserving knowledge and preserving freedom. And sometimes freedom is more important than wisdom." Over the next several hours, Kane worked with each group separately, sharing alien military knowledge that seemed impossible for humans to understand. But somehow his crews adapted. Commander Ellis learned to think in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Major Cross discovered how to use controlled rage as a tactical weapon. And Kane's own group began to understand warfare as a form of communication. The battle began at dawn. If dawn had any meaning in a system with 3 dying stars, the Devourers had gathered around the largest Keeper city, preparing to begin the final phase of the convergence. But instead of a desperate defense, they found themselves facing something they had never encountered before. Commander Ellis's ships appeared and disappeared like ghosts, striking from impossible angles and vanishing before the Devourers could respond. The creatures tried to adapt, but how do you adapt to enemies that exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously? Major Cross's assault force attacked with such savage intensity that even the Devourers seemed shocked. The Iron Fang tactics were designed to overwhelm the enemy's ability to process information, and against creatures that depended on learning and adaptation. The approach was devastatingly effective, but it was Kane's group that provided the key to victory. Using Mindweaver strategies, Kane began communicating directly with the Devourer collective consciousness. Instead of trying to destroy them, he started showing them alternative solutions to their ancient problem. "You don't have to absorb all knowledge," Kane transmitted through quantum communication channels. "You can scatter it, distribute it among species that can handle it safely. You can become guardians instead of consumers." For the first time since the battle began, the Devourers stopped attacking. Their massive ships hung motionless in space, as their collective mind considered Kane's words, but not all of the Devourers were convinced. A faction within their consciousness rejected Kane's proposal and broke away from the main group. These rebels began attacking everything in sight, determined to complete the convergence, even if it meant destroying their own kind. The battle became a 3-way conflict as the loyal Devourers fought their own rebels while the human fleet tried to protect the remaining Keeper cities. Kane found himself commanding not just human ships, but also serving as a communication link between species that had been enemies minutes before. "Admiral," Torres called out, "the rebel Devourers are heading for the main archive. If they reach it, they'll have enough knowledge to complete the convergence on their own." Kane looked at the tactical display and saw the truth. The main archive contained not just the knowledge of 1,000 civilizations, but also the location of every other archive in the galaxy. If the rebels absorbed it, they could hunt down and consume every remaining source of knowledge in the universe. "All ships, new target," Kane ordered. "We have to reach that archive before the rebels do." The Thunder's Edge and her escorts raced through space. dodging both rebel devourers and the debris from destroyed keeper cities. Kane could see the main archive ahead, a crystal structure so large it had its own gravity field. But the rebel devourers were closer, their dark shapes already extending tendrils toward the ancient library. Kane realized that conventional tactics would not be enough. Even with all his new knowledge, even with the help of the loyal devourers, they would not reach the archive in time. He made a decision that would have horrified the man he used to be. "All ships, target the archive itself," Kane ordered. "We're going to destroy it before the rebels can absorb it." The crew stared at him in shock. They had come to save the keeper archives, not destroy them. "Sir," Torres said quietly, "that archive contains the wisdom of every civilization that ever existed. If we destroy it, that knowledge will be lost forever." Kane looked at his old friend with eyes that held the memories of 1,000 different species. Sometimes the greatest act of wisdom is knowing when to let go of knowledge itself. The fleet opened fire on the archive, and Kane watched as millennia of accumulated wisdom began to burn in the void between the stars. The weapons fire from the human fleet struck the main archive just as the rebel devourers reached it. The ancient crystal structure began to crack and burn, sending waves of energy across the entire system. But instead of being destroyed, something unexpected happened. The archive began to fight back. Admiral Kane watched in amazement as the crystal structure transformed before his eyes. The stored knowledge within was not passive information waiting to be consumed. It was alive, conscious, and had been waiting for this moment for countless ages. The archive itself was a collective consciousness made up of every civilization that had ever contributed to it. "Admiral," Riley called out from her station, "I'm detecting massive energy surges from the archive. It's like the entire structure is waking up." Kane understood what was happening. The archive was not just a library. It was a living entity created by the combined knowledge of 1,000 different species. And now, faced with destruction, it was revealing its true nature. The rebel devourers tried to absorb the awakening archive, but instead of consuming it, they found themselves being pulled into something far more complex than they had expected. The knowledge within the archive was not the corrupted information they were used to. It was wisdom that had been refined and purified by centuries of study and debate. "This is not what I expected," Kane said, feeling the alien knowledge in his mind responding to what was happening. The archive is offering the devourers something they never considered, the chance to understand knowledge without being consumed by it. On the main screen, Kane could see the battle changing. The rebel devourers were no longer trying to absorb the archive. Instead, they were communicating with it, their dark forms beginning to change and brighten as they made contact with the living wisdom within. Leto appeared on the communication screen, his crystalline features glowing brighter than Kane had ever seen them. "Admiral Kane, what you have done has awakened something that has slept for millennia. The archive is not just our creation, it is the combined consciousness of every peaceful civilization that ever existed." Kane felt a new understanding flowing through his enhanced mind. The keepers weren't just collecting knowledge. You were creating a safeguard against the very corruption that drove the harvesters mad. Yes, we have spent eons filtering out the dangerous knowledge, keeping only that which can help civilizations grow and prosper. But we needed a catalyst to awaken the archive's true power. We needed someone willing to risk everything, including their own nature, for the sake of freedom. The battle around them was ending, but not through victory or defeat. Instead, Kane watched as something entirely new was being born. The rebel devourers were transforming, their hunger for consumption being replaced by a desire to protect and nurture knowledge. The loyal devourers were merging with the archive, becoming guardians rather than destroyers. But Kane knew the real test was yet to come. Throughout the galaxy, other devourer fleets were still consuming civilization, still working toward their version of the convergence. The solution found here would mean nothing if it could not be spread to them. Leto, can the archive communicate with other Devourer fleets across the galaxy? It can, but the process will require a living link, someone who can bridge the gap between human unpredictability, Keeper wisdom, and Devourer understanding. Kane realized what Leto was asking. You want me to become that link permanently? The choice is yours, Admiral. You can return to your fleet and go home to Earth, carrying with you the alien knowledge you have gained. Or you can become something greater, a permanent bridge between species that will ensure this solution spreads throughout the galaxy. Kane looked around the bridge of the Thunder's Edge at his crew. These people had followed him across the galaxy, trusted his decisions, even when those decisions seemed impossible. Captain Torres stepped forward, understanding what his admiral was considering. Sir, if you do this, you'll never be able to come home. Kane smiled, and for a moment, Torres saw a glimpse of the man he had served under for 5 years. Captain, home isn't a place. It's the knowledge that the people you care about are safe and free. Kane turned back to Leto. What exactly would I become? You would become the first of a new kind of being, part human, part keeper, part devourer. You would exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, able to communicate with any form of consciousness. In the galaxy, you would be immortal, but you would also be alone in ways that no human has ever been alone. Kane considered this. The knowledge within his mind showed him what the galaxy could become if this solution succeeded. Civilizations would be free to grow and develop without fear of corruption or consumption. Knowledge would be shared safely, protected by guardians who understood both its power and its dangers. But it would require him to give up everything that made him human. There is another way, Kane said slowly. Instead of one permanent bridge, we create many temporary ones. Train others to undergo the knowledge transfer, but for limited periods. Humans who can carry the solution to other parts of the galaxy, and then return to their normal lives. Leto considered this. It is possible, but dangerous. Not everyone can handle the transformation as well as you have. Kane looked at his crew. Again, then we ask for volunteers. People who understand the risks but are willing to take them for the sake of galactic freedom. To Kane's surprise, every officer on the bridge stepped forward. Commander Ellis spoke for all of them. Sir, we came out here to answer a distress call. The job isn't finished yet. Over the next several hours, Kane worked with Leto and the Awakened Archive to create a new solution. Instead of one permanent bridge between species, they would create a network of temporary bridges. Human volunteers would undergo limited knowledge transfers, carry the solution to other star systems, and then return home. The process would be slower than Kane's original sacrifice, but it would preserve both the solution and the volunteers' humanity. The first group of volunteers underwent the transfer process. Kane watched as his officers experienced the same expansion of consciousness he had undergone, but in smaller, safer doses. They would carry with them the knowledge needed to communicate with Devourer fleets and offer them the same choice that had been offered here. As the human fleet prepared to leave the Keeper system, Kane realized that everything had changed. Galaxy would never be the same. The threat of the convergence was ending, replaced by a new age of cooperation between species that had never been able to communicate before. Admiral, Torres said as they prepared for the jump to hyperspace. What do we tell Earth Command when we get home? Kane looked out at the stars, seeing them now with eyes that held the wisdom of ages. We tell them the truth. That we answered a distress call and ended up saving the galaxy. And that sometimes, the greatest victory comes not from defeating your enemies, but from helping them find a better way. The Thunder's Edge and her escort ships jumped to hyperspace, carrying with them the solution that would transform the galaxy. Behind them, the Keeper cities glowed with new purpose, no longer just preservers of knowledge but active guardians of wisdom. And in the void between stars, beings that had once been devourers began their new role as protectors of the very civilizations they had once tried to consume. Kane knew that his own transformation was far from complete. He would never again be the simple human admiral who had first received that alien distress signal. But as he looked around at his crew, all of whom had been changed by their experience, he realized that evolution was not something to be feared. It was something to be embraced. The deadliest fleet in human history had become something more than human. They had become the guardians of freedom itself,